The year is 1789, and France is in a financial crisis, and to address it, King Louis XVI calls for an assembly. It's one of nobles and clergy and citizens. That's the kind of meeting that hadn't happened in France for 175 years, and we know a lot about those meetings because there was somebody that went daily and observed them and then wrote down what happened. You've probably heard his name before, Thomas Jefferson. In fact, Thomas Jefferson and his secretary, William Short, that was his name, were not only witnesses at these crisis meetings, but later that summer in France, they were actually present on the streets of France when Paris descended into chaos and violence. They roamed the streets to learn firsthand what was happening in France. And it was Thomas Jefferson who would record for us the finer details of the French Revolution, how the common people armed themselves with anything they could find in the shops and the houses. They roamed through the night in all parts of the city. Here's what he wrote: without any decided and practical object. That's what he wrote. It means they formed a mob, and they did what mobs do, and they rioted and looted and burned and killed. And it was Jefferson who would then, also writing about the storming of the Bastille. It was a fortress that was used as a prison that the people overtook. They got all the guns and the ammunition. They set all the prisoners free that were inside. They beheaded the ones who were in charge. And then they marched the heads through the streets of Paris. And it was Jefferson that would write about the panic that spread through the king's court as they heard about rumors of a mob of 150,000 revolutionaries that was on its way to the palace in Versailles to massacre the royal family, the court, the ministers, and all connected with them. Now, that didn't end up happening, but Jefferson's words put us in the middle of the fear of the king, and he feared that it might. And as you can imagine, there's all kinds of misinformation about what really transpired and about how many people were actually beheaded or actually killed. The king's information was that thousands of people had been beheaded by the mob, but Jefferson, who was on site, could only confirm that 3 people had been beheaded. And in the text where he clarifies this, where he writes this down, he says this: I went yesterday to Versailles to satisfy myself what had passed there. For nothing can be believed but what one sees or has from an eyewitness. In other words, don't believe it unless you see it. And I've seen it, so you can believe it. Luke will write in Acts chapter 1, after the tomb of Jesus was found empty, that there was a period of 40 days that Jesus presented himself alive to the people that he knew the best. It says that Jesus spent his time convincing them. That's an amazing word. Convincing them that it was really him. That it was really him, back from the dead and alive. Now, we understand why he did this when we think about the plan of God that hung in the balance. If Jesus emerges from a tomb only to be rejected as somebody risen from the dead, then all of the gospel message is done. It's lost. Jesus, the perfect sacrifice for sin, becomes just a name that is never known by anyone other than a few dozen of his closest friends. See, if no one ever sees him, then no one ever believes him. And the very salvation of the world depended on Jesus showing and convincing his friends that he was alive. And so he did. For 40 days, he appeared to people. He appeared to Mary. He appeared to 2 disciples on a road. He appeared to a guy named Thomas. He appeared to his disciples all together. He appeared to Peter. He appeared to more than 500 people at one time. Jesus spent 40 days on the earth after he walked out of a tomb, making eyewitnesses to his risen again status. Here's what Peter, one of his best friends, will later write of Jesus. He says this: we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we told you about Jesus. No, we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. Don't believe it unless you see it. And Peter says, we've seen it, so you can believe it. Now, if it's true that nothing can really be believed but what one sees or has from an eyewitness, as Jefferson wrote, then here's what we have. We have everything we need to believe that Jesus lived again after he died. We have eyewitnesses who heard, who saw, who touched a risen Jesus. And it's because of them that you and I know the name of Jesus today. So for the next few weeks, Joel has told you about this. We're going to launch into some of the accounts of these people who saw firsthand a risen Jesus, and then they passed on to us what they saw to be true, that Jesus is alive. And today we encounter this character, this woman named Mary from John chapter 20. She's both the earliest eyewitness, but she's also the most intimate eyewitness. The text tells us that there was a woman named Mary Magdalene at the tomb of Jesus early in the morning. Jesus had been taken off the cross on Friday and buried in the tomb, and now it's early on Sunday morning, and she arrives at the tomb, and the first thing that she saw was that the stone that was used to seal the tomb up had been moved. And she instantly thought, well, that's not right. And so she goes to get a couple of other disciples of Jesus. She grabs Peter, and she grabs the other disciple, which is surely John himself, who is writing this passage. And she frantically tells them that Jesus' body must have been taken somewhere because it's not in the tomb. Would you please come and help me figure out where they have taken him? And so by John's account, the earliest eyewitness to the empty tomb is Mary. But it's not actually only Mary. John mentions Mary, but look what she says. She says, "We do not know where they have laid him." But hold on, who's we? Pretty simple. We is the other women who were with Mary when she first went to the tomb. John doesn't mention them by name, but they are absolutely here, because if we pull in all of the other gospel accounts, the testimony of Matthew and Mark and Luke is that there was a group of women. These were friends and followers of Jesus who are the first to the tomb. Mary is among this group, and they are the first to see Jesus alive. The initial eyewitnesses to see Jesus in all four gospel accounts were women. And so I'll say it this way. Jesus appeared to his sisters from other misters before his brothers from other mothers. Okay? And that little detail matters. Why does it matter? Because things were different in the first century than they are today. In the first century, women were held in a lower class than men. Women could not inherit property. They could not give evidence in court because their testimony was inadmissible. We assume that was because of a prevailing attitude and belief that women could not be trusted to tell the truth. Listen, I'm just the relayer of messages, okay? This is the first century. Throw rocks at them, all right? And yet, all four accounts of the resurrection of Jesus say that the people who first witnessed an empty tomb and saw a risen Jesus were women. And that little factoid tells us that the accounts, as they are written in the Gospels, have to be true. Why? Because if people got together after the fact and decided to make up the story of Jesus walking out of a tomb alive, they never in a million years would have written it this way. If the resurrection was a made-up story, they never would have made the first witnesses be women. No. They would have wanted the story to be credible. See, they would have wanted somebody like maybe Thomas Jefferson as a witness. See, I rolled all that off to you, right, about Thomas Jefferson and what he wrote about the French Revolution, and you believe that without a doubt. Why? Because he's Thomas Jefferson, right? He was the president. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. His picture is on the money, okay? We believe him. And that's what they needed if they're making up a story. Someone trustworthy, someone believable, somebody credible. And that would have been just about anyone other than women. Now, add to that little problem of the credibility of women in general, this other problem. The problem of Mary specifically. Do you know about Mary Magdalene? Mary was a woman that we're told in Luke chapter 8 had 7 demons that controlled her. Jesus came into her life and delivered her of those demons, but deliverance from demons and deliverance from the perception of other people are two colossally different things. If women in general are seen as untrustworthy, Mary, because of her past, because of what she had going on, the baggage that she came with, is likely one of the most untrustworthy women. Imagine. Somebody says, Jesus is alive. Oh, really? Who says? Well, Mary? Like, demon-possessed Mary? Like crazy Mary? Like hysterical Mary? Possessed Mary? See, that would have been the possible reception to the story. And so nobody's going to write it that way. The only way Mary gets to be the first one to see an empty tomb is if it really happened that way. The women are here, and Mary specifically, and because they were, in fact, the initial eyewitnesses to a resurrected Jesus. Even people who are highly skeptical of the resurrection will look at these texts and agree that these women absolutely had the experience of an empty tomb, and they believed with everything in them that they had seen a risen Jesus. Now, after Mary reported these things, there's this section of text that Joel kind of covered in his communion thought that I didn't read, and that's a whole other sermon, but I just want to give you the punchline, okay? John points out that he's a faster runner than Peter, and it's always a competition, right? And John says that he looked into the tomb, and he went in, and he noted what was there and what wasn't there, and then he writes this great line. He saw and believed. What did he see that led him to believe? That's the whole other sermon that I don't have time for, but it wasn't Jesus. Jesus was missing, but John still saw something there, and there was enough evidence in front of him that he believed. Some of you, here's the punchline, some of you may be praying today, God, would you just show yourself to me? Will he? I can't speak for God. I don't know that he's going to show up in your life and speak to you like he showed up with Mary, like we're going to talk about here in a second. But what I can say is this, that John's experience shows us that belief can come even if he does not. John believed. He didn't ever see Jesus, but he had all the evidence he needed without ever seeing a risen Jesus in the flesh in this moment. And you can too. Everything you need to believe is already right in front of you if you'll open your eyes. Go to verse 11. Mary stays at the tomb after Peter and John have left, and she is weeping, and that's totally understandable. We get that. If you put yourself in her shoes just for a moment, if the cross wasn't enough pain and anguish to watch, now from her perspective, somebody's taken his body, maybe even his enemies, so that we can't even mourn properly. We can't anoint his body with burial spices. And so Jesus was the one person in the world that had come into Mary's life and given her hope. Literally, he had given her a new lease on life, delivering her from the demons in her life. And her life now made sense because of Jesus. And now, not only is he dead, but his body is gone, and she is lost. She's standing there weeping. And it's pretty easy for you and I, some of us, to weep alongside with Mary. There are any number of things in our life that we hope in that get taken from us. And in those moments we're lost and we don't know what to do either. And Jesus seems very absent sometimes in those moments. In verse 12, Mary gets the courage to look into the tomb. Again, this is after Peter and John have left. And she gets a surprise because there are 2 angels in there. Where did they come from? Don't know. They just popped up. They weren't there before. One commentator puts it this way: Mary is weeping, and maybe you only see angels through tears. Oh, that's an interesting thought. When angels show up in the Bible, they usually tell people not to be afraid, or they ask what's wrong. I'm pretty sure that when angels get issued their handbook, those 2 lines are clearly written to every angel. Here's what you need to say when you show up on the earth. And so, right on cue, they deliver their lines. What's wrong, Mary? And Mary answers very honestly. They have taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him. Now keep standing in her shoes. Her very foundation, her very security, her heart, her purpose in this life has been taken away because of the death of Jesus. Maybe you have stepped in here this morning because you've had some things taken away from you. Maybe a job, maybe a home, maybe a spouse, maybe kids, maybe friends, maybe your resources, maybe your dignity, maybe your health, maybe your hopes. See, as Mary stands there weeping, we can see ourselves weeping right along with her. And in her grief, she sees this figure. She assumes a little, and she guesses who it is. She thinks this must be the gardener. Maybe he's minding the burial grounds, right? Maybe he's the one that has taken Jesus' body, or at least maybe he saw what happened. And so she addresses the gardener. Look, sir, we're at our wits' end here. If you know anything about where his body went, maybe you moved it. Just tell me where he is. Like, you're the gardener in charge here. Maybe you don't have to lift a finger. I'll do all the work. Just tell me where he is, and I'll go get him. And on one level, Mary is so wrong. This isn't the gardener that she's talking to, right? It's not some random guy with hedge clippers. We know who it is. Who is it? It's Jesus. And so we know Mary is wrong, but on another level, Mary could not be more right about who she's talking to. Because this is the gardener. Jesus is the gardener, come to fix the broken garden of creation. In this very moment, alive, even though he had died, Jesus is cultivating and perfectly pruning and manicuring the life to come. He is the new man, the new Adam. He is the one charged with bringing the broken, chaotic world into new order, into flower, into fruitfulness. He's the gardener who comes to uproot the thorns and the thistles and replace them with the blooms and the harvest. And one of the greatest things that we get to say about what the resurrection means for us is that the resurrection makes Jesus the ultimate gardener. Because he conquered death, he's able to take whatever it is that sin has taken from you, whatever sin has destroyed in your life, whatever sin has broken in your heart, and he's able to conquer that as well. Resurrection means that a resurrected gardener is here to give you back whatever it is that you've lost. And he's here to give it back in full, and he's here to give it back in a way that it becomes even better than it was before. Mary mistakes Jesus as the gardener. Now, what would you say if somebody close to you didn't recognize you? I was at a certain event not long ago, and there were some college friends that I hadn't seen in a while, and I popped up in front of their faces and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And they looked at me like they had no clue who I was, and I remembered that I didn't have a beard in college, right? And so I just said, it's me, behind the beard, it's Dusty. Oh, there it is. And their eyes open, right? That's what you say. It's me, when somebody doesn't recognize you. Why doesn't Jesus say that here? It's me. My clothes are different, Mary. I'm version 2.0, but it's me. Just get past the new clothes and the shininess, right? It's me. He does not say this because this is an intimate, personal encounter. And you can see it just in the words that are used here. When Mary pokes her head in the tomb and the angels see her, they use the word woman. Woman, why are you weeping? They didn't have a relationship with Mary, right? Even Jesus himself calls her woman as she mistakes him for the gardener. And it's not until he uses the most beautiful word in all of language that she recognizes him. What is that? You know what the most beautiful word in all of the English language is, right? We've said this before. It's your name. That's what you want to hear more than anything. And Jesus says, Mary. And all he has to do is use that word, and then she sees. In fact, she'll run back to the disciples and say, I've seen the Lord. The word John uses there is different than all of the other times that somebody sees in this text. He writes about a lot of people seeing a lot of things in John chapter 20. But this time, when Mary says, I've seen the Lord, the word he uses means to experience. Mary in the garden didn't just see Jesus, but she personally experienced a risen Jesus who called her by name. There's a lot of reasons we could go through that the resurrection is a logical thing to believe. We could use our intelligence to arrive at belief. That's what John did when he looked in the tomb. But maybe more impactful for a lot of us today is that the resurrection is intensely intimate. It's personal. There are more signs of it here. In verse 17, Jesus tells Mary to go and tell the others that he is alive. And look what he calls them. Always before this moment, they've been labeled followers or disciples or friends. But look who they are to Jesus now. In verse 17, they are called what? Brothers. Brothers. He calls God my Father, but he's also quick to say, your Father. What does that mean? It means Jesus is saying, God is my God, but also equally your God because of what I have done. And so in this new world that the Master Gardener is creating for us, we get to know God in the very same way that Jesus does. We get to be treated just like Jesus is. We get to be a son of God, just like Jesus is the Son of God. Everything that is true of Jesus is now true of us. We get to be kids in God's family. We get to live in the palace of the King. We get to live happily ever after. Why? Because he is alive. He's alive. What we're really after in life is meaning. We attempt to find it through work or having a family or becoming a certain kind of person, and all of those purposes are great and noble. But if life does what it always does and it ends and there's nothing more, if the eclipse coming tomorrow ends us all, right? If we just rot in the ground like an old tree stump and we're no more. If this world years and years from now does what everybody thinks it might do and it heats up to the point that life is no longer possible here so that there's nothing, what then? It will mean that our careers that are so pressing right now, it will mean that our loves, our families, our friendships that are so important to us right now, it'll mean that the kinds of things that we're chasing after, all the projects that are weighing on our hearts right now, that we're so deep into, it will mean that they mean nothing. Nothing. Who wins the election? Doesn't matter. Who wins the tournament? Doesn't matter. The fact that you got a raise or a promotion or that you were in love with somebody, if the world burns up, then none of it matters. It will make no difference. One man said it this way: we're just an echo that dies out in the darkness. If there's no resurrection, then you and I and whatever we're doing is just the biggest waste of time and the biggest scam of all. That's the real tragedy to be worried about. It's not really an eclipse. If the resurrection is a sham, then the good we do. I love this picture. It's like finding an old Corvette in a barn somewhere and working to restore that Corvette, getting it to showroom quality, just to then push it over a cliff. If the resurrection is a farce, then any love you show in this life is like painting a masterpiece, painting the next Mona Lisa, just to toss it into a fire. If Jesus isn't alive, then any good we manage is wasted energy. But if the resurrection is true, If God raised Jesus from the dead, as reported by Mary in John chapter 20, if we can believe it because she has seen it, then we get to take hope in a God who says, I will also make a new heaven and a new earth. I will renew this life. I will restore it to its original intention. I will take everything that sin has taken from you, and I will give it back only better. And all of a sudden, everything in life matters. If the resurrection actually happened, if God will one day renew this earth, then every prayer, every act of love, every kindness, every minute that you try to teach a child to read or to walk, every moment sitting with a lonely person matters. If Jesus is alive right now, every work of art or music that is inspired by the love of God, every act of care for the earth or the people on the earth will some way find its way into a new creation that God will one day bring about. The smallest acts of kindness become suddenly infinite if the resurrection is true. If Jesus is alive, there's no waste of time, even for the smallest expressions of love. There's no such thing as a wasted life. Nothing can be believed but what one sees or has from an eyewitness. Here's what we get from Mary, the eyewitness, the earliest and most intimate eyewitness. It's pretty simple. The tomb is empty, and Jesus is alive. And there is no historical fact that will change your life like that one. I want you to ask yourself a question. Have you decided to do life differently because Thomas Jefferson reported that a few people were beheaded when the French commoners decided to rise up? Anybody's life swing on that one? No. But when we learn Jesus is alive, our lives change wholesale. Jesus gave his life for you. Your sin and death was heaped on him at the cross. His reward for right living was transferred to you, and he got death, and you get life, and we have this hope now because of the assurance of the resurrection. When you know that he is alive, the one thing that you can never do is stay the same. And so where are you today? Maybe you're here today and you're not really sure about the Jesus thing, and you just need, like John, you need to see some evidence. I want to tell you it's there. Would you keep searching today? Maybe today you've come in and you're drawn to this personal, intimate Jesus. And maybe you want to have a friend like that in your life. I need that kind of Jesus in my life, but I can't see through all the junk that's been done to me. Would you keep listening? Because Jesus is calling your name. Stop focusing on all of the trash in your life just long enough, and I promise you'll hear it, because he is the gardener who knows how to prune a withering life so that it becomes vibrant again and alive and flowers. And he is worth following. Maybe you're here on the other side of both of those things. You're on the other side of a decision to follow Christ. Listen, your mission now is to go and tell people about the resurrection. You be the eyewitness that you have had given to you. If somebody in the first century wanted to invent a story about people seeing Jesus, they never would have dreamed of giving the star part to a woman, let alone Mary Magdalene. And yet here she is, the first one sent to tell the news. Did you notice that when we read it? Jesus says, go tell my brothers. He gave her the most important mission in the history of the world. She became the first apostle to the apostles. And if she can tell the story, then you can too. You can too. Lord, would you help us to see today with our hearts what is right in front of us, that the tomb is empty. We thank you for the testimony of Mary to tell us this. May we see and believe today that Jesus is alive. And may it change us completely. We give you praise and thanks today in the name of the risen Christ Jesus, and all the people